God, David. Our last message was on rejection. And now it's on the beloved of God. In the 16th chapter of 1 Samuel, we're talking about reviewing the whole chart. And we're up here under the law, but about halfway in the middle here of this number 5 on your chart. Now the Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil, and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have selected a king for myself among his sons." Now we already see how far this goes back. If you go back to the book of Ruth, back over here. Ruth, the 4th chapter. Now the neighbor woman gave him a name, a son born to Naomi, so they named him Obed. And he is the father of Jesse, the father of David, the king, basically. Now these are the generations of Perez. To Perez was born Hezron, and to Hezron was born Ram, and to Ram was born Amminadab, and to Amminadab was born Nahshon, and to Nahshon was born Solomon. And Solomon was born to Boaz, and Boaz Obed, and Obed was born Jesse, and to Jesse David. He goes all the way back. You go all the way back to the 9th chapter of the book of Genesis. This is all played out into the last chapter of the book of Genesis. It talks about David, the lion of the tribe of Judah. He said, "How can I go when Saul hears he will kill me?" And the Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. And you invite Jesse to the sacrifice. And I will show you what you shall do, and you shall anoint for me the one whom I designate or pick out or point out to you." So Samuel did what the Lord said and came to Bethlehem. Remember, this is where Jesus is going to be born too, isn't it? And the elders of the city came trembling to meet him and said, "Do you come in peace?" And he said, "In peace, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come with me to sacrifice." And he also consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. Then it came about when they entered in, he looked at Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed is before me." That's his firstborn son. Remember, in the Bible, so many times God rejects the firstborn. The rejection of the firstborn is kind of a law. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have rejected him." God sees not as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. When he chose David, he chose a man after his heart. David loved God. David was an imperfect man, but he loved God. And then he called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel, and so neither has the Lord chosen this one. Next he made Shammah pass by, and he said, "Neither has the Lord chosen this one." And thus Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, and Samuel said to Jesse, "The Lord has not chosen any of these." And Samuel said to Jesse, "Are these all your children?" And he said, "Well, yeah, there remains one, the youngest. And behold, he is tending the sheep." He didn't even invite him to the party. He's not even invited to the party. Then Samuel said to Jesse, "Send and bring him here, for we will not sit down until he comes here." And so he sent for him, and now he was what we might call ruddy, robust. He had calluses on his hands. He had sunburned face and back and arms, and with beautiful eyes and handsome appearance. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. And Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David. From that day forward, and Samuel arose and went to Ramah. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit sent by the Lord to terrorize him. And Saul's servant said to him, Behold, now an evil spirit from God is terrorizing you. And let our Lord now command your servants who are before you, let them seek a man who is skillful to play on the harp. They want a musician. Music calms the soul. And it shall come about when the evil spirit from God is upon you, that he shall play the harp with his hand, and you shall feel better. You'll feel better. You'll be well. So Saul said to his servants, Provide for me a man who can play well, and bring him to me. And one of the young men answered and said, Behold, I have seen the son of Jesse of Bethlehem, who is a skillful musician. You know, David was one of the greatest musicians of all time. His songs are still sung in the world today, thousands of years later. Psalm 23, that's David's song. A musician, a mighty man of valor, a warrior, one prudent in speech and handsome in man, and the Lord is with him. So Saul sent message to Jesse and said, Send me your son David, who is with the flock. And Jesse took a donkey and loaded it with bread and a jug of wine and a young goat, and sent them to Saul by David his son. Then David came to Saul and attended him, and Saul loved him greatly. He became his armor bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, Let David now stand before me, for he has found favor in my sight. Until he finds out who he is. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, Let David now stand before me, for he has found favor in my sight. And it came about, whenever the evil spirit of God came to Saul, David would take the harp and play it with his hand, and Saul would be refreshed and be well, and the evil spirit would depart from him. Now, David has now decided that he is a servant of Saul. And he's going to love Saul. He's going to put Saul above everything. And we'll see that in the chapters to come. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array against or encountered with the Philistines. Now the Philistines stood on a mountaintop on one side, while Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. This is a famous story now. We got a Nephilim here. This Nephilim, this Bigfoot, or whatever you want to call him, a Bigfoot Goliath. There's a champion came out from the armies of the Philistines, Goliath by name, from Gath, whose height was 9 foot 4 inches. Pretty big old boy. 9 foot 4 inches. He had 4 brothers also. And he had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was clothed with scale armor, which weighed 5,000 shekels. That's about 141 pounds. 141 pounds. That's a lot of armor. He also had bronze greaves on his legs and bronze javelin slung between his shoulders. And the shaft of his spear was like that of a weaver's beam, and the head of the spear weighed 17 pounds of iron. His shield carrier also walked before him. And he stood and shouted it to the ranks of Israel and said to them, Why do ye not come out to draw up in battle array? Am I not the Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down against me. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, then we will go become your servants. But if I prevail against you and kill you, you shall become our servants and serve us. You'll become our slaves. Again the Philistines said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. Now, there's some pretty big men there. Saul is a pretty good sized man. He's well over 6 foot tall. It said he was the head and shoulders above all the others. He's tall. He's over 6 foot tall, well over 6 foot. But this man is 9 foot 4 inches. And how much would this man weigh? 9 foot 4 inches, probably close to 1,000 pounds. Somewhere around between 800 and 1,000 pounds. And Saul and all Israel heard the words of the Philistine, and they were dismayed and greatly afraid. But David is different. Now David was the son of the Ephraimite of Bethlehem, to Judah, whose name was Jesse, and he had 8 sons, and Jesse was old in the days of Saul, advanced in years among his men. And the 3 older sons of Jesse had gone before Saul into battle. And the names of the 3 sons went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, and the second was Abinadab, and the third one was Shammah. Now Eliab means God is Father. And Shammah pretty much means fame or renown. And David was the youngest. Now the 3 oldest followed Saul. But David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's flock at Bethlehem. He's still a sheep herder, but he's out there working. And a Philistine came forward morning and evening for 40 days and took his stand. 40 days now, they're standing out there in battle array. 40 days. And Jesse said to David his son, Take now for your brothers an ephah of roasted grain and 10 loaves, and run to the camp to your brothers. He's just a runner boy still. That's all he is, just a running boy. Just a messenger boy. Bring also 10 cuts of the cheese to the commander and their 1,000, and look into the welfare of your brothers and bring back news of them. For Saul and they all the men of Israel are in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. No, they're not fighting with the Philistines. They're sitting there shaking in their boots. Nobody's doing anything. They're just sitting there listening to a lot of talk. Now David rose early in the morning and left the flock with the keeper and took the supplies and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the circle of the camp while the camp was going out in battle array and shouting a war cry. Going out in battle. They just look at each other and hollering at each other. Yay, you bad people, we're going to get you. And they're going back and forth just with words, that's all. This was not a war, this is a war of words. And Israel and the Philistines drew up in battle array against each other. Then David left the baggage in the care of the baggage keeper and ran to the battle line and entered into order to greet his brothers. And as he was talking with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine from Gath named Goliath, was coming up from the army of the Philistines, and he spoke these same words. David heard them. Now David was way away from the battle before, but now he's there, and now he's looking at this giant, and he's hearing the giant's words. When all the men of Israel saw that the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid. They're all afraid of him. Well, this man with one arm could whip 50 or 100 of them. But we got God's champion. We got God's hero now. Like Samson was, we got another Samson. We got one greater than Samson. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who's coming up? Surely he is coming up to defy Israel, and it shall be that the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. That means they would be, the whole house would not have to serve and give taxes or anything. They would be like royalty. Now David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, what will be done to the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach of Israel? For who is the uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God? And the people answered him according to his word. And this it will be done for the man who kills him. Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger burned against David, and he said, why have you come down here? What are you doing here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? You're supposed to be back there herding sheep, boy. I know your insolence and the wickedness of your heart, for you have come down in order to see the battle. You didn't come down here as a spectator. You come down here to see the slaughter, is what it actually said, the slaughter in Hebrew. But David said, what have I done now? Was it not just a question? Just a word? A hadabar? They turned away from him to another and said the same thing, and the people answered the same thing before him. And when the words that David spoke were heard, they told him that to go to Saul, and he sent him for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail on account of him, for your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. I will go fight with this Philistine. This is a young boy, and he hasn't been in battle before. He has killed a bear and a lion and wolves and protected those sheep. That's what a sheep herder does. But he's never been tested in battle before. But that didn't matter, because he knew who his God was. He knew his God. Then Saul said to David, you're not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been in armor and a warrior, in armor and a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant was tending his father's sheep when a lion and a bear came and took a lamb from the flock. I went out after him, and I attacked him and rescued him from his mouth, and when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard, and I struck him and killed him. This is like an African lion, the big lion. And it's a male lion too. They're stronger than the female. I went after him and attacked him and rescued him from his mouth. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God. Now, Saul wasn't in communication with God any longer, was he? God had basically abandoned him because of his wickedness. And David said, the Lord, who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, also shall deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, may the Lord be with you. Now what he's going to do here, he's going to go out there and he's going to trust in the Lord. They're going to try to put armor on him. They're going to try to put shields on him, which he can't handle because he's not big enough. What he's going to do is trust in the Lord. Now David is not only going to trust in the Lord, but you know, Goliath has 4 brothers. He's going to kill Goliath, and he's going to kill all the other brothers too. He's going out there with the armor of God. Saul clothed David with his garments, and put a bronze helmet on his head, and he clothed him with armor. And David girded his sword over his armor, and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. He hadn't trained in this. So David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. And David took them off. Took them off from himself, is what it says in Hebrew. And he took his stick in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook. He was going to kill all of those Philistines that were Nephilim. And he put them in the shepherd's bag, which he had, even in his pouch, and his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. Now the Philistine came on and approached David with a shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and with a handsome appearance. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you could come out me with sticks?" David had a rod and he had a staff. The rod is, they would catch a sheep. If it was going astray, they'd get this crooked staff, and they'd bring it back, and then he'd whip it with a stick, and then make it get back in line. And the same thing with the dogs. If they had dogs, they'd catch them and whip them and put them back in line and correct them. He said, "If you come out here to whip me like a dog or a sheep, am I a dog that you should come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by all of his gods. And the Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and spear and the javelin, and I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, Jehovah Sabaoth, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted, which you have insulted. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild birds of the earth, and that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel." He said, "I'm not going to kill you, I'm going to kill all the rest of them. I'm going to kill your brothers. I'm going to kill you and I'm going to kill your brothers. I'm going to wipe out your army today." And here is a young boy with the faith of God in his arms and his legs. "And that all the assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into my hands." Then it happened, when the Philistines arose and came and drew near to David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. Now David's moving in an agile way. He's not weighted down with all this armor. He's like he was with the bear and the lion in the field. David put his hand to his bag and took from it a stone and a sling, and he struck the Philistine in his forehead, and the stone sunk into the forehead so that he fell on his face to the ground. Now this is a divinely guided rock. Divinely guided rock. You know, when God rejected Saul, finally went into the battle, he contacted the witch of Endor. God sent back Samuel, and he saw Samuel, or the witch of Endor saw Samuel, and Samuel told him that you're going to die. So Samuel went out and he dressed in civilian, or his warrior's clothes, not his kingly clothes, and he went out there, what we call incognito, and yet when a man randomly pulled an arrow and shot it, it found the crease in Saul's armor, and it went in and fatally wounded him. Then it happened that the Philistine rose and drew near to David, and David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And the stone struck him in his forehead, and it went deeply, and he hit the ground. Then David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine, and he killed him but there was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword, and he drew it out of his sheath, and he killed him, and he cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. The other 4 stones were not needed yet. And the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley and the gates of Ekron, and the slain Philistines lay upon the way to Sha'arim, even Gath and Ekron. And the sons of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines and plundered their camps. And David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem and put his weapon in his tent. Now when Saul saw David going out against the Philistines, he said to Abner, commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this young man? And Abner said, by your life, O king, I do not know. And the king said to inquire whose son the youth is. And so David returned from killing the Philistine, and Abner took him and brought him before Saul, and the Philistine's head in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? And David said, I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. Now it came about, when he had finished speaking, that the soul the son of Saul, the soul of Jonathan, was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as himself. These 2 young men loved each other. They were going to be warriors in the same battles. And Saul took him that day and did not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him, and he gave it to David, with his armor, including his sword and his bow and his belt. The belt's a very important thing. The belt had the lineage on him. That showed he was a kingly lineage. And David went out wherever Saul sent him, and purported, and Saul sent him over the men of war. He became a general. And it was pleasing in the sight of all the people, and all the sight of all Saul's servants. And it happened, as they were coming, when David returned from killing the Philistines, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, and singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines. And this is where things changed. With joy and with musical instruments, the women sang, and they played and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David, but David his 10,000. And Saul became angry, for his saying displeased him, and they have ascribed to David 10,000, but to me only ascribed thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom? Now he's going to realize pretty soon that God had chosen David to be his replacement. But David was always faithful to Saul. Always faithful. He's a faithful servant. Saul looked at David with suspicion from that day forward. Now it came about on the next day that an evil spirit from God came mightily upon Saul, and he raved. That word there is he was talking in tongues. That's the word there, mantuomene, in Greek. He was talking in tongues to the evil spirit. In the midst of the house, and David was playing with the harp with his hand as usual, and the spear was in Saul's hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought that I will pin David to the wall, and David escaped from his presence. Saul was afraid of David, for the Lord was with him, but he had departed from him. The Lord had departed from Saul. Saul had, what we call, gone beyond the point of no return. This is a joyous story for David, but it is a sad story for Saul. David was willing to follow God and willing to do things God's way. Saul was not. Saul was not jealous of his men or or Jonathan, they loved each other. But Saul, the green-eyed monster of jealousy, was in his heart, and it was there until the day that he died. Worship the Lord your God. Serve him the way he wants you to serve him. And lay your hands and your heart in his hands. That's the message. Our Father, we send this message out this day for your honor and glory. Please use it. Touch your children's heart with it. Guide them, comfort them, encourage them, convict them at times. Please forgive me where I fail you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.